if you cared to. I was going to say at first blush, and I slightly sidestep to what we have been talking about. You could divide up in the secondary world humanity into two great orbits having to do with problems of a certain kind, human problems. But you could divide up these two great camps regarding human problems into those people who want to tell you how they feel about the problems, and the other camp that apparently want to find solutions to the problems, treatments to the problems. There is the third one that I would suggest is this kind of stuff, wherein there are a few people that seek to go beyond that, that understand that there are no such things as adequate treatments because of the way life is arranged, having to do with the nature of the problems themselves. But people who begin to suspect, especially when it's pointed out to them, that if there are solutions, I mean cures instead of solutions, if there are any, they are always local and individual. That what seems to be the problems of the secondary world, what seems to be the problems unique to man, not the primary problems, not problems having to do with the three great S's of sex, shelter, and sustenance, but anything that would seem to be, that would appear to be vis-a-vis, withal, relative in comparison to primary life and death problems, and these other secondary world problems would appear in a certain sense to be man-made. In other words, there are not problems that are in any way shared with other creatures on this planet, whereas what we could call the primary problems you do share. You share it with dogs, all sorts of creatures on this planet. You share it that you've got to have food and sex must take place, mating between the creatures. They must have the proper environment, shelter, whether it be caves or holes or whether it be condos. Those kind of primary problems we have in common, without any doubt, with other creatures. But there are no creatures that share anything resembling the real problems. Human problems. But the problems that seem to be, as should be obvious now or in a few minutes to some of you, they seem to be, quite properly so, they seem to be man-made problems. Just the kind of things that we're surrounded by right now. There's always been some form of it going on, but right now, man-made problems, pollution of the environment, the great cry that we're going to destroy the planet, that it is man-made problems, the great old war cry that man made these problems, so man is the solution to the problems. We're not going into questioning the appearance. That is the way it appears. That is the way the ordinary secondary intellect takes the secondary problems. But beyond the first two groups that operate, that we could, since I've already done it, dichotomize into those who want to tell you how they feel about it. The ecological problems. You have people out marching, you have people riding, you have people discussing, and wanting to tell you how they feel about the problem. That they don't like it. They're mad. They're disturbed. They're frightened. And then there are a group, always when the problem gets that big that there is a kind of widespread activity going on in the first camp. That is, many, many people at some local level about where the problem is begin to want to tell how they feel about the problem. Then you can count on very shortly, in a sense, it's going to move up even another step in the secondary world, and you're going to have people that are even more centered around the nervous system hierarchy part up toward the brain that will not just be satisfied. Not that they understand anymore, but they're just simply wired and primed differently. That they are not the ones to say, well, boy, I hate this, and shame on us, and we're all going to hell in a handbasket, or whatever the latest cliche is. Instead of that, you have the people that go, well, yes, there is a problem, and they're the ones that normally, under most circumstances, would be referred to as the world of academia, the intelligentsia. That they would say, well, there is a problem, what we got to do is work on the problem. Those two, and then what I'm suggesting to you that we could refer to still as the revolutionist, burns to go somewhere else. And there's somewhere else I can put in words, I've done it before, but it is so dicey for the ordinary intellect to see. The words make a little sense, but it is to go beyond not only telling how you feel about the problem, to go beyond what ordinary people in the city, apparently a little more intelligent, a little more insightful, a little less passionate, emotional. Those who say, well, we should work on the problem. The third possibility I'm suggesting of a real neural subversive is something else that goes beyond all of that. Not a cure to the problem, not to tell anybody how you feel about the problem, but into an area that is not available to the nervous system normally. That is an investigation, a serious inquiry, a curiosity as to why it is that man has such problems. Now, the tricky part, if I may point out the obvious, is that the ordinary intellect could hear me say that and say, well, you're talking in circles. Because the camp that you mentioned as being number 2, that is what they're interested in, is they're trying to rectify the problem. And they're pointing out that the reason we have a problem, such as pollution of the environment, the reason we have it is because of man's stupidity, or his insouciance up until now as to the health of the ecological chain on this planet. That's the problem. We don't have to look any further. Man is the problem. Say, that's not what I said. Jesus. It's why is it that man has to have the problem? And that's not the same thing as saying, well, you're asking what caused the problem. No. So you missed it already. There is no way, and I'm assuming that some of you hear this, it's not all that tricky the way we've been discussing things, but the ordinary intellect simply is like a radio, that there is a certain frequency that every now and then I can talk about or that you can hear, but the ordinary intellect simply does not have it on the dial. And perhaps you could discuss it off the air, or when somebody turns off their receiver and you say, hey, there's a station you never heard about and it kind of goes da-da-da-da-da, and somebody might go, yeah, all right, I kind of hear you. But then they actually try to turn on their radio and pick it up. And it's like, well, that almost made sense, but I'll be damned, I can't receive it. I'm not picking that up. Because all you're asking, when they turn on their radio again, they don't get WLAC. What they do is they get the response that I just said that was the tricky part. It says, wait a minute, all you're saying is, you're saying a revolutionist or somebody exceptional or unusual. They're interested in why man has problems. And you almost had me going there for a minute. But all you're saying is why we have problems, and we know why we got problems. Our own stupidity, our own lack of concern, anything. And that's not it. The revolutionist inquiry is why is it that man apparently must have problems? Now the question at the primary level would be simple enough for three-dimensional response. Call and answer. We could sing a three-dimensional blues version of it and say down there you can say, why do we have to have food? And that's hardly even worthy of an answer, is it? Then you say, well, all right, why do we have to have sex? Come on. All right, why do we have to have some form of shelter? Are you serious? Right? So all three of those, there are answers, apparent, obvious answers. In other words, if you consider starving to death a problem, who's going to say that that in any way is irrational or weird? Anything, any sentient creature, any actual creature on this planet is going to starve to death without the right kind of transfer of energy, the right kind of nourishment. So it's not a question that there are no problems at the primary level. You could say that the primary level is the place that initially, in a silent way, invented the word problem. Because dying is a problem. I've heard several beavers and one mountain lion and several people say that they consider dying, or at least the possibility of dying, a problem. Now, who are we to disagree? But now the question is, go into, at our three-dimensional world, this singular world of man. Civilization, what we've been calling the secondary world of man. That is based on this, that is based upon an extension of life's own nervous system at our level through man. there you have not only, you could say, additional possibilities that other creatures do not have, but it carries with it what seems to be inescapable problems. The ordinary intellect cannot fathom even the question. It cannot hold it as to why might that be? What might be the mechanics behind man having to have these singular problems in his singular world, when in fact they are not death-defying, not in the same way starving to death, losing your job, losing your position, being passed over for a promotion, being ridiculed for showing up at a party in last month's clothing, expressing an opinion whereby you have mispronounced the name of Iraq's splendid leader, or that you have misplaced the capital of Mongolia. And well, now of course I'm trying to lighten up a little bit, but that's the sort of things that people go, oh, I could just die. Of course, figure of speech, but people in the secondary world, as it's supposed to, that is serious business. It's not just funny, it's not sarcasm, and I picked them pretty light, so go somewhere between misplacing the capital of Outer Mongolia, all the way from that to dying. Now somewhere in there, well, somewhere in there in the secondary world are problems to the secondary world, to the individuals that are serious. It can make all the difference in the world in your secondary world. You're speaking about you generically as an individual, a local individual. If you do get passed over for a promotion, if you do spend your whole life writing the great Albanian novel, writing the great Hungarian symphony, and it's your whole life work, and here it is, you lay out your soul, and the powers that be look at it and say, kid, it's a shame you ever left the farm. You know, I hope you didn't give up your day job. You can say that my life is, in a sense, ruined. I have been assaulted in a most serious manner, and it's true. That's the kind of balance, that is the kind of jockeying around for position there in the arbitrage queue. That is the basis of the secondary world. Everything's always at risk. Information, reputation. But now note, it is valid to discuss it as the key, as the initial mapping out of a new neural territory, even though it's all relative. But compared to primary problems, life and death problems, then you can see, right quick, you can see, I mean, you've already laughed and given it away. I don't have to ask whether you see it. You can say, hey, compared to starving to death, mispronouncing Fox Pass for the 14th time in mixed company, that, you know, relatively speaking, that is not do or die. 13 times I've done it, and I'm not dead yet, and I still have a decent job, and I can pay the rent. So you can say, well, it's not do or die at one individual local level. But why? What are the mechanics behind it that such problems are real problems? Real problems. And of course, one more time I'll point out the inquiry that I suggest should be of interest is, as always, double-barreled, is what is the purpose behind that, and sort of the smaller barrel, if you want to, is why is it no one ever notices or ever thinks to ask these kind of questions? Why didn't I ever think? I mean, it just seems like problems. Some of them seem to me worse than others. I mean, the kind of silly examples you made up, you could be saying, well, the kind of examples, I don't care that much about my personal appearance. I don't care whether somebody says, oh, you're still wearing Calvin Klein jeans and, you know, passe. I don't, who the hell cares, you might say. But then you might say, you know, whether you wanted to or not, your nervous system might say that it does not like even staying there wearing Calvin Klein jeans at a party and perhaps a few people snickering, and even you notice it and you think, well, I don't care. And then suddenly in the midst of talking, there you go again, and your tongue and lips just get out of hand and say Fox Pass instead of faux pas. And that you take seriously. It's just a local problem, but you consider it quite seriously. You never even ask, why do any of these, whether it seems to be local, or if it seems to be more serious with me than it is the person next to me, what is the general basis of these being, are you ready? Quotes, problems, chipmunks, One way that you could take one glimpse of it is to consider that ordinary men, for ordinary men, ordinary growth is only possible with problems. Now, assuming that there's any sort of growth for the time being, but let's just say a ordinary city life, fairly well spent. Just an ordinary person working, raised a family, stuck out a marriage for a while, sent their kids through school, or at least didn't drown them in the river when they were nippers. Served in the service if they were drafted, and attend church every now and then. Just ordinary bourgeoisie people. And let's consider that their life, in a moment, let's consider that there was some growth. Let's consider that. If it is so, it could not happen without problems. Now, from a more manifold view, of course, we have already pointed out that, no offense to humanity, that's not the question at all, but in a sense there is no growth in an individual lifetime unless somebody is involved with some extraordinary effort. And of course, as some of you like to say to yourselves, even that is kind of, you like dicey? Dicey. But even let's just take the ordinary view of the people, that somebody will say, some ordinary person will say that they're fairly humble, and they'll tell you the kind of guy they are and get the thing going. And then they'll say, if you say, well, do you think people grow? They might say, well, yes, I think I've grown some. I don't brag about it. I know people that grown because, all right, when my oldest son died, there he was just graduating from college, or when something happened in his life, when my business failed. I'm going to tell you the truth. I started drinking heavy. I was a terrible father. I wandered away from my wife for several months. I don't know how she put up with it. And for some reason, though, I guess that kind of thing, it either breaks you or it makes you stronger. I came back and I went back to my religion, and I don't know, I took even more succor from my own children, just being around the children that were left. That I don't know, I feel, I'm not bragging. I mean, you brought it up. I do feel like, if you want to put it that way, that I have grown. Let's just accept that, because many people, life is wired up that many people say that. They say that about each other and people in their family, and they will say it about themselves. All right, let's accept that. But do you see that an ordinary man, and don't worry about it there, look in your own down right here, there is no way at that ordinary level that you could even uphold the appearance. You couldn't even try and fake it. You couldn't vamp along until something real happened and even say that, well, yes, I think I've grown, unless it had to do something with what? A problem. That's the only way in the city. That's the only way the ordinary men can even come up with a flashing, a passing facade for a second that maybe I have grown, or maybe it's possible to grow in life. Maybe people do grow. Maybe he's wrong. Maybe people do grow. And if I say, give me an example. If I just said it nicely. The example would be tied to what? An FP. Not a fighter plane. A bloody problem, a BP. That's the only way you can gauge at the ordinary level that anything has happened. It has to be in some way a problem. And you might note also, as always, the more you would move into the secondary world, to make spatial terms, descriptions, the more you would move into the city, into the areas where the intellectuals really were working, that is, in you, then the more those kinds of people judge growth on the basis of overcoming secondary problems, not primary problems, you understand. Now, if we were talking about, let's go back to bricklayers in Mississippi, or tuber farmers in Bulgaria, assuming they still got any dirt left in Bulgaria. That's when you know you're hard up. Anyway, if they talk about growth of any kind, if we got a farmer there in the Ukraine or in Mongolia or somewhere, and you said, is it possible that people grow in it? And somebody says, well, yes, my brother, I have faith in him. The idea that people don't grow, you're wrong, because he has. And if you ask him what, in other words, we're getting down to good, more primary-based, red circuit, motor-run people, then their idea of growth is going to be what? You should hear. It's going to be, if we were talking about in an area where it was harder to actually provide sustenance for the body, they might say, all right, my brother lost his farm. The state took away his farm because they didn't like something that one of our cousins wrote in a newspaper once, and those damn communists came in, they took away his farm, and his family almost starved. We had to feed him for a while, and he got out there. And finally, one of our neighbors had some up here, some property up in the hill, that so rocky nobody can fool with it. And my brother went up there with his hands on his hands and knees with a spoon and dug out this and started raising enough kumquats that he fed the family. The growth would be on the basis of primary growth. And if you want to jump from Bulgaria, if we got in right here into a more westernized city, if you were dealing with still more red circuit people, their idea of growth would be what? It wouldn't necessarily be. That would be on the basis, if you said, can people grow? You say, well, yeah. My brother, son of a gun, been smoking 3 packs a day for 30 years, came down with lung cancer. They diagnosed it in time to cut out one of his lungs, and he stopped smoking. In fact, he goes around, sometimes he tries to collect money for some non-smoking ordinance for the lung association or something. The man, and he went back to church because he realized, the ephemeral nature of life. I don't know why he knew the word ephemeral, because some of us just barely know it. At any rate, do you see the idea of growth? The more you're talking about somebody dealing at the lower ends, lower levels of primary world, then the more the idea of growth is going to be at the primary level. Just very simple things like overcoming disease, overcoming routine sicknesses, overcoming sexual dysfunctions, overcoming having 3 wives leave him. It'll always be on that basis. But what I was trying to get you to see was no real great point, or at least I wasn't going to lay on it myself tonight, was let you take it off. The more you move away from that, if we moved into, let us say, the academic community, and instead of staying around a bar and hear guys talk about that their brother or somebody grew because he was able to eke out a living on some farmland in Mississippi that nobody else even wanted, or that he overcame losing a lung and he quit smoking, he overcome sickness. Instead of that, if we were now in a cocktail party in the world of academia, what would they be talking about? Now, of course, they may know somebody's sick, etc., but that is not their idea of growth. Their idea of growth is what? It is more into the secondary world of the intellect. Growth is going to be, do you remember old so-and-so? Yeah, I went to school with him. Well, you do know he was hired on a temporary basis at Michigan State. Well, I didn't even know that. Yeah, but do you know he had some sort of run-in? I'm not sure what it was. I don't think it had anything to do with morals or sex, but he had some kind of run-in with a department head. Not only did not get tenure, but they would not write him a recommendation. Well, I always liked him. Well, let me finish, though. He went back to UC, changed his major, went after a doctor's, and changed over to sociology and got it, and is now teaching at Berkeley. And the people stand there and go, that's growth. They're impressed. That is growth. But they would never even think. They might say, well, what happened to so-and-so? I heard he had cancer. Oh, he died or he got well. And they go, oh. And that's the basis of it. Unless the conversation got into, well, he's being treated by some new, triple cat or some kind of new piece of technology. They might discuss the technology. But as far as people dying or being able to feed themselves or not feed themselves, that doesn't strike them as any area of growth. Because those are not problems to those people. That's not a problem. Closest thing to a problem with food might be my cook quit, my maid left. Now, all of that to you. Do you recall I mentioned sort of in passing a method that I suggested at times, just use it as a hobby if you want to, is dividing up your own interests, what seems to be the kinds of things that drive you, the kinds of things that interest you, and now the kinds of things that seem to bug you, that is problems, as to whether they could actually, using our artificial and yet not without value division into primary and secondary problems, worlds, affairs, and interests, and which ones of yours are actually primary and which ones are secondary. Well, not any judgment of not saying, well, this is obviously, given those two choices, then this one interest I have, this one thing I keep considering a problem, is actually secondary compared to life or death. It's still no judgment. It's not to say, well, shame on me. But it's just to have some idea, perhaps help you internally, like me just having to continue to gesture and do chipmunks and stuff, to realize the kinds of energy that flow through the human nervous system the importance of a train flying by, and if you never question, where the hell's that train going? All you know is there's a train comes by, and at least thank God that they no longer let them build L's that close to the apartments and the residential areas in Greater Manhattan. But it's obviously something important because that thing goes by here at, God knows what, 100 miles an hour, and I can see just images of very important people, that is, ideas on this train. Problems. Is that train going anywhere that you want to go? Is that your problem? Are the very things that you think of as being personal problems, if in some way, go back and play this one again, it's been a long time since I've done it, if I could conjure up some sort of genie, and you could figure out your biggest problem, and the genie would take it away, are you sure, if you're ordinary, if you couldn't aspire to any more, are you sure that you'd be pleased that it happened? The obvious answer is always, well, yes, I would, because I'd pick out one that I know is a problem. The ordinary intellect does not know what a problem is. An ordinary intellect does not realize. It's like an old story of an elephant in a parade tripped and fell out of the parade. Didn't hurt itself bad, but just tripped and fell out of the line of the parade going by. And somebody said, well, that's a shame. And the trainer said, well, it's not, the elephant's all right. That's not the real problem. It's just that him falling out, he pulled the tails out of 14 other elephants. I hate it that this one car ran off the track. Well, I do too, but that ain't the real problem. That one car, because it was just one car, there was one guy in it. But when it fell off, it took 14 more cars with it. There's nothing like trying to clean up and simplify a metaphor. The ordinary intellect cannot select one thing and say that's the problem. And there is no way to prove that. I'm not going to stop and try and give any literary history again. But take the good cheap shot, the easy shot. The world of literature is replete with stories concerning this, of people just sure they knew what was wrong. Sometimes they tried to even make it cruder than what they're doing, like the King Midas touch. That wasn't like he was trying to cure something that was wrong. That was like he was coming up with a new improvement over himself. But you could say, well, what was wrong was he didn't have enough money, didn't have enough riches, so he came up with his genie that gave him the power that everything he touched turned to gold. And that wasn't until the day the fly got on his head and he went. I know that wasn't the original story, but that's still the basis. That's still the basis of it. And they're fairy tales, they're tales of mythology, the religious books. They just don't point them out this way at all, because that was not the obvious point. That was not the three-dimensional point of the stories, but it's still the stories that somebody somewhere thought they knew what their problem was. And they asked for it to be treated, if not cured, and it was. And things did not work out exactly like they had in mind. In the kind of stories in the 3D world, the moral always is something that makes you look off, so that there's no possibility that you question, wait a minute, where'd the damn story come from? What's the purpose of this? Why do people have problems like that? Forget the thing about the cure didn't work. Wait a minute, why do people have these and why do they call them problems? Then I get to why the cure never works. But see, the moral always is, it goes, the moral is, and it goes, that is, here comes another train. You go, where? Nobody ever asks themselves, do I actually want to ride? That is, not knowing where it's going. There is also probably should be obvious to many of you, but not only that ordinary growth cannot even be conceived of, cannot be pursued, could not happen in the secondary world without problems. That is, not the primary problems, they're always there. The primary problems, in fact, I guess you know, are going to win. That is, you're going to die, and you're going to die out in the cold, or at least after you die, you'll go out in the cold. That is, all three S's, you're going to lose them. You're going to die, and you're not going to have a house anymore. They're going to put you in the ground so you'll get real cold. Plus, you will become, I hate to say this, but impotent. You'll no longer engage in sex. So the primary problems are finally going to win. Now, you might as well accept that. It's not a case of, well, someday I'm going to overcome the primary problems. No. So ordinary people are having to deal with the ordinary intellect in the secondary world, which is where it more and more resides and where it is headed. That is the nature of the progress of man in life's body. Ordinary men must have ordinary problems, or there's not even the illusion, there's not even the feeling of growth. And the part I was going to say is surely obvious to some of you, to do something out of the ordinary, you have got to have some kind of out of the ordinary resistance. You can't just be dealing with primary problems, because even people in the city, as I was trying to point out, just ordinary intellectuals, many ordinary people in the middle class, nothing exceptional, are no longer dealing with primary problems. They don't think on that line. You eat when you're hungry. You engage in a little bang-bang when you're horny. You come in out of the cold when it gets cold, and you turn on the air conditioning when it gets real hot, and all that stuff. But it's not a problem. The only problems that most people now in our society, this part of life's body, this part of the world, are secondary problems. But also notice, to do anything out of the ordinary, to do whatever this kind of stuff might be, it's obvious by now, is it not? I knew you'd agree. That you cannot be dealing with ordinary secondary problems that won't get you anywhere. Not that everybody else is wrong, but you've got to know that by now. Worrying about position, and these are not attacks. Worrying about anything that civilized, sophisticated, reasonably intelligent people worry about won't get you anywhere with this. Now, that's just a fact. Whether anything will get you anywhere with this is still open to question, but that sure as hell won't. I mean, there's no question. It just won't. So there you are. So you could overcome, you could resist, you could struggle with every secondary problem in the world and knock them all down one by one. And where would you be? Dead. You'd be King Midas if the final problem went down, and you'd go, wow, boy, what a relief. And your brain would then be gold-plated and, should I add, no longer operational. People might go by and say, God, that guy's dumb. Yeah, but ain't his brain nice and shiny? Don't he look nice with that gold brain? A revolutionist, a neurosubversive, has got to come up with some kind of out-of-town resistance of his own. Because there is nothing to be gained if the problems can be overcome, which that's not the point. But if they can be overcome and actually cured, it won't get you anywhere. Not regarding this kind of stuff, not regarding anything outside the city limits of the secondary world. And I was going to use that to lead up another little idiom that you could call the tyranny of radical perception, the tyranny of out-of-town understanding. And that is that you individually become able to see outside the city limits, outside the problems of man. Once you do that, I don't frighten anybody, but once you do that, in a sense, if you're going to continue, then once you do it, then you cannot any longer linger on the problems that you have once seen past. It's a tyranny. Once you understand what it was in your case, let's say, that one thing that seemed to be a problem, and you see the problem and its nexus. You see the mechanics behind men, you, conceiving this as a problem, and you see past it. The tyranny is you can't go back and wallow in it. You can't go back and hang around it anymore. Put it another way then. So I can practice penmanship. let's call it wrong. If you think anything's are, since we're using this also, if you think anything a problem, I thought it had a certain rhythm, but it's not just being cute. That if you, anybody, if you think that anything is a problem, then everything is. Now, certainly, not necessarily that you would feel at the same level if you say, well, I think that pollution of our planet is a serious problem. And then if I said, all right, I'll take that example. If you think anything's a real problem, then everything is. Then you can say, all right, I consider that some other things are a problem. I consider that the armament race between the Eastern and Western powers is a problem. But, say you, with all sincerity, I'm not questioning it, it would be reality to you. Your local perception would be the arms race has been a problem, is a problem, but it is not as much of a problem as pollution. So in other words, that does not hold dirty water. I'm glad we don't have to deal with ordinary people. If your intellect perceives anything to be amiss, then everything is amiss. It is five-dimensional mathematics. Some of you should be able to see it. If there's one piece of the web, if there's one piece of the carpet that is flawed, the whole thing is flawed. As long as you perceive, as long as you think, as long as you feel, let's say that you are really getting hip. And you say, I'm beginning to think that life is not as skewed and flawed as it was. But because as long as you think that anything is a problem, anything is wrong, anything is flawed, anything is incorrect, anything is out of order, then everything is. There's no way out. It is the basis, mathematically, electrically, of the human nervous system, of brains, and there is no way out. Now, you could theoretically, which is why sometimes I try and throw in such verbal caveats, that you can begin to think, well, wait a minute, I am beginning to see, I'm able to push my own intellectual frontiers, and I don't think, I was worried about all kinds of things. I used to think there was some kind of communist conspiracy to take over the world. And then I thought, no, it's not that. It's some kind of Masonic conspiracy. Now I thought, no, it's not that. It's motorcycle dealerships, it's particularly Harleys behind all. But then I began to think, that ain't the problem. Yeah? In fact, I look around and I'm no longer upset by life. I used to be upset by Republicans, by communists. I used to be upset by foreigners. I used to be upset by people that were taller than I am. I used to be upset by people who looked real strong and muscular and looked like they might, give me a kick if I got too close. I used to worry about, now I don't worry about stuff like that anymore. It's no cynicism. Any ordinary intellect, forget the person, the nervous system itself, inside that person, any ordinary nervous system will never get down, not even this, but I'm just trying to, of course, make the point. They'll never get down here, but they could get down to saying, my life now, I see, instead of storm clouds and conspiracies, I begin to see clouds and sunshine and sparrows every morning and daffodils. Yeah. Of course, I do see this one guy out in the woods that's got a gun. In other words, there's always one dark cloud. That's simply the basis of the human nervous system. That is the basis that life would not be growing were it not for secondary, that is apparently man-made, singular man-made problems, man-experienced problems. And everybody on this planet, I'll push it one more time, even if they reach the epitome of growth in the city and said, by God, I agree with you. Things are not wrong. Things are not going downhill. Well, except, of course, for the obvious. Whatever the obvious is to you. It's always one. Of course, people are not going to get the one, but do you hear the point? It will always get the one. You don't have to worry about this thing kicking in. It was already kicked in when you got here. That if you think anything's wrong, then everything is wrong to some degree. But now does it give you any kind of new view of why humanity cannot in any way figure out, philosophize, if there was such a use of that poor misused term, theorize, think their way, discuss their way, to a point that even theoretically, that any human on this planet, any ordinary human, finally says, hey, Voltaire was wrong. This is the best of all possible worlds. Everything is just neat as hell. No sane person, and the more they're saner, the more they're educated, the more they're respected, the less likelihood, the less possibility they'd ever say, you know what? After 60 years of worrying and investigating and thinking, I just suddenly realized, in spite of the fact that I'm about to die and I got arthritis, and I lost a lung, and I just realized nothing's wrong. That's not going to happen. It does not happen. If it did happen, if somebody, and of course justice again prevails, if somebody did say that, which I'm sure somebody said that, but if somebody said that and they were in a position to command authority or attention, you know what happened, don't you? They'd put him away. They'd say, that man, do you realize he used to work? He was one of the original men working on the Manhattan Project. The man was a genius, and did you hear, now here he is 80 years old standing up there. Did you hear that? In an important meeting, they invited him, they was going to give him an award, and he got up and said he had decided, God, I'm embarrassed for him. The man stood up and said that he had decided after a lifetime that nothing was wrong. The man's obviously sick. And in a sense he is. If that would happen. Because notice justice prevails. If anybody did say such as that, it'd just be some guy staggering down the street drunk that inside his brain was the infinite number of monkeys with typewriters, and they finally wrote Hamlet. And so the guy says, nothing's wrong with life. That doesn't matter. Anybody can say that. But if it's the position that they seem to have some authority that it might affect other people, it might be a virus that he could mark off territory in other reasonable people's minds that, wait a minute, nothing is wrong. And they went, well, that's silly, except that man, I respect him. If he said that and was somebody respectable and somebody that commanded attention, it would be the basis. I always did respect him up until now, because now he's obviously senile. Something is wrong. Somebody help him off the stage. Would somebody call a doctor or his wife or something? The man, in a sense, would have died because he would have stopped growing if he was ordinary. If I could stretch reality, and if such a thing happened, he would have stopped growing. He would be ready to die if, in fact, he said that and he was somebody in a position to make other people's neural territory even be subject to being marked off by that comment. He would be dying himself, because that is not the nature of the human nervous system. That is as unnatural as can be. And of course, at the local level, it's not true. It can't be a theory. It's nothing that, for some reason, if anybody ever tried to go out and make some kind of cult or religion or something, you can't do that. It's logical. The sentence, rhetorically, will fly. But you can't do anything with that out there in the street. You can't do anything with the city intelligence of anybody. You simply cannot. Because locally, it's not true. Because locally, everybody on this planet knows that there are things wrong with human life. Everybody knows that. And at the local level, it's true. And there's nothing you can do with this kind of information if you live at the local secondary level. Because if you were living at the local secondary level, and I started playing with reality again, and if you could see that, you would die. Because you're ordinary, but now you have no problems. And you cannot grow. We've already established that, you forgot, 10 minutes ago. Ordinary men cannot experience ordinary growth without problems. That's the only way to even judge. That's the only way And I don't mean that it's some kind of delusion, but that's the only way to gauge. That's the only way to measure out growth at the ordinary level is to overcome a what? Not an aggressive voice teacher. A problem. Well, I knew you'd see the folly of your ways. Above the primary world, to be a little more specific, of the problems, the three S's. To get above that, consider a man's secondary world, the singular world, that perhaps the most common. Now we're pushing it over into, like my example, the world of academia. The real avant-garde, the mechanical cutting edge of humanity. The development of more and more people, but the development of a group of people that are driven more and more by the intellect, the highest end of the nervous system possible. There's groups out there and people individually, internally. Probably the most common diagnosis of problems when you get closer and closer to the high end. The most common denunciation of human behavior, but the diagnosis of the most commonly noted in the secondary world is what? I'll be glad to tell you, the doctor's in. It's other humans saying about each other and indirectly about themselves this denouncement, this serious diagnosis of a problem. 3 words. It's not reasonable. Because in the primary world you have got it as a kind of secondary reflection, a secondary variation of what in the primary world would be suicidal. You understand? When you get into the higher world of the intellect, to say that something is, let's assume that the diagnosis has some three-dimensional validity, that one person turns to another and hears his idea about something, he says, that it's unreasonable. It's not reasonable. Assuming there's some three-dimensional validity, that is a secondary variation of what at a primary level would be to say that somebody is doing something that is self-defeating to the point perhaps of being suicidal. That you're saying, hey, by the way, that bottle you're drinking is hemlock, that's not a Coke. That would be a primary version of this secondary denunciation or diagnosis to tell somebody, hey, that's unreasonable, because you're saying the intellect is trying to intake that which is poison, that which is self-defeating. You're trying to mark off territory in your own brain, or now mine, by something that is not fit for neural conception. It's not reasonable. We might care to note again the first 2 groups that we started talking about tonight. Neither one of them are fit to react to that, to deal with it. Not in any way that goes beyond the obvious playing field of being caught with your reasonableness down. They are certainly none of the first 2 groups that want to talk about how they feel about this kind of unreasonable, unexpected, perhaps harmful, but at least unreasonable ideas, beliefs, behaviors going on in life. The problems of secondary life. Those, and then even the second group that say, well, that's true, we got some problems, but there's no sense us whining about it. We need to find some treatments. The kinds that oftentimes in the city are seen as being the intellectuals, politically oftentimes referred to as the progressive. They're the ones that say, well, hey, what we got to do is appoint some committees, do some studies, put out a nice big report on this, bind it up real nice. And of course, from a primary view, from those that won't talk about, hey, I don't like living in a crime-ridden neighborhood. I don't like being poor when most everybody else around my local city is rich. That's the first group that wants to talk about how they feel about the problem. Then the second group says, which are not experiencing the same problem. Okay. They say, well, that must be a problem. Now that I think about it and I see all you poor people, I'll tell you what we're going to do for you. Get my secretary and tell her to contact the president or my congressman and tell them I want a committee appointed and we'll investigate this. Tell them they got no more than 18 months and I will report on this. We'll be back with you people. All right, the whiners that is, people who want to talk about how they feel about the problem, forget about the poor. These are always with us. Because you've always got the group of people who are simply wired and primed that the problems are simply the food to tell them what kind of guy they are. In their complaints with society, their complaints with their fellow man. But then the other group, which is, mechanically speaking, a kind of secondary evolution that say, well, enough people are complaining about that, so we're going to have to consider this a problem. Now, what we're going to have to do is study the problem, figure out how to treat it. But you understand, it is a self-fueling mechanism. It doesn't stop because the problems cannot be growth. The more extreme point that I was going to re-point at before we have to take our leave was neither of those two groups can ever begin. That is, none of the ordinary wiring and primed systems of ordinary nervous system and intellects can ever get down to the point of questioning why it is that man has to have problems, as he calls them. Now, not primary, but these secondary problems, why they're there, why they cannot be cured, and even when they apparently are treated, and one seems to go away. It's like playing with acne when you're a good, horny 13-year-old male, I guess. You might cover up one and try to hold it down, and Jesus, by the time you go and look out the window, it's over here. And so you can do that, and the so-called problems never go away. It seems like you change the name. It seems like, well, I got rid of this bump on my nose, and suddenly somebody says, have you looked over close to your right ear? Oh, and you get rid of that, and it's somewhere else. And nobody questions it. Oh, I know somebody questioning it. Life's got people here and there that holler, boy, life's a pain in the you-know-what, or, life sucks, I'm going to kill myself. Oh, please don't, please don't. But nobody inquires, as we're trying to do tonight, or I'm trying to encourage you to see, there is a mechanics behind this. There is a scientific transfer of energy behind the words, behind the problems. Problems a name. An ordinary system is not wired up to even be interested in it. It does not make any sense. That, one more time I repeat, rhetorically makes sense. Other than the fact it's just meaningless. The ordinary intellect cannot do anything with that because it is, the sentence makes sense, but it's patently untrue. Obviously untrue. And if I believe that that's true, I got a problem. Five minutes. How about another stanza in our continuing canine epic? Okay? My guy, sitting around with his dog again. They're talking, the guy's talking. And he's kind of musing to the dog about, boy, how much I like you, how much you mean to me, and how neat it is that life not only made humans, because I find me tolerable, but I especially like you. I mean, it's like, and then life arranged things to where humans and dogs end up together, and we can have each other, and it obviously must serve some sort of purpose. I mean, it's no longer just a primary purpose of me having you here to protect the property of the farm, because I live in a damn condo on the 14th floor. But still, there's got to be some purpose being served, between us being brought together. Now, it's so great to be a dog, and suddenly while he's petting him, he looks down and he says, ooh, I guess it's great to be a dog except for those old fleas. But then my guy, striving to be somewhat insightful, he goes, wait a minute. He rebalances himself to the dog to try and be as truthful to the dog as we try to be with each other here. And he tells the dog, rather than me just making a cheap shot at fleas, the guy sort of waxes philosophically and says, but then, of course, fleas got to live, and obviously life in some way needs fleas. And the dog suddenly thinks to himself, this story's gone far enough. I was going to try and give us a route there to point out to you that the ordinary intellect is not wired or primed to go beyond to certain initial, obvious stories and infos that would seem to offer some kind of routine explanation. The man even apologizing or pointing out to the dog about how great life is and to be there together, except for the problem he's pointing out about the dog, the problem you've got with fleas, but then tries to be a bit more philosophical based upon some little things he perhaps suspects about the great ecological chain, the balance of nature, and begins to say, well, but I guess fleas even got a purpose. The dog in my little story, I suggest to you, might represent the limits of the ordinary intellect that says, you know, that story's gone far enough. I trust that all of you didn't just laugh that you thought it was a punchline. It is a commentary, once you see it, on the non-ending processes of life, but how the dog I'm using as ordinary intellect, secondary view of life, that, you know, everything, what you're talking about was going along all right, but don't start apologizing for fleas to me. Don't start apologizing, don't start trying to rationalize, don't start trying to explain the limits, perhaps even the impotent nature, the vacuousness, in your opinion, of my problems to me. You know, it's gone far enough. I don't need this. I'm the one that got the fleas. What it has to do with, if it was ordinary explanations, is the ordinary intelligence cannot go beyond its own interest. The dog cannot go beyond. The dog cannot, he don't want to hear any stories about, wait a minute, you're fixing to tell me that fleas, they got some purpose. And it may be. Let's assume that the dog even got a glimpse of, hey, if you keep this up, I'm going to have to agree with you. I've been around you and I'm beginning to think like you. And you're going to start talking about even fleas. Even fleas have parasites. And so we can start that. And the dog, he wanted to cut it off, though. You've gone to the city limits of my perception of problems. You have gone past my area of interest. I'm the one with the fleas. Don't start apologizing for fleas. Don't try to give me a philosophical explanation as to fleas have a right to exist, or that life has some great plan and fleas are in it. The fleas are not on you, they're on me. That is the limits of ordinary intelligence. What city dog cares whether fleas have some cosmic purpose? None. You'd have to be talking not about a city dog, you'd have to get down and be talking about some kind of revolutionary retriever, some kind of subversive spaniel or shepherd. But no city dog's going to be interested in where fleas fit into the cosmic scheme of things, because fleas are what? A problem. I got one line left. I want to say one thing. Will it get on tape some way? We'll arrange it. It's just, I can't resist. Everybody knows this old term I was fixing to use, this axiom. And, of course, the way I'm about to twist it, as you damn well know, has no three-dimensional validity, and no city dog would ever buy this. But this whole idea of the truth shall set you free, from religions, from philosophies, and people continue to parrot it under political auspices and economic affairs and interpersonal relationships, whatever the hell those are. But let me give you an insider's reflection of the mechanics of the energy behind what caused life to have some man say that and many people repeat it. Is the ordinary intellect, the city dog. The ordinary intellect does not, I'm stretching it to say does not, but we're about to wrap it up. It does not want to hear, if there was such a thing, it does not want to hear the truth, because the truth would set it free. That is, would relieve it from problems, and now you would stand nude, perhaps with a Midas touch. You can't wipe the sweat off your brow. You can't even go to the bathroom. You kill yourself. You'd ossify your kidneys and your private parts. There you stand, a man with no problems and nowhere to go, if you're ordinary. That is why all this thing about you should know the truth or seek the truth, because the truth shall set you free. And all over the world, that is, all through nervous systems, people go, yes, yes, that's true. And there are people holding us back from the truth. Of course, they can't even answer the question. You say, who? And they'll always say, well, the communists, our next door neighbors, the guy holding my mortgage, somebody, my in-laws. Nobody's hiding, if there was such a thing as the truth. But the basis of this thing about you should know the truth, and the tacit part being is that nobody knows the truth. Or if they do, there's only been one or two guys here in history that stood out like a But the whole thing is to encourage you that you should know the truth, because if you could grasp the truth, it'd set you free. But it's a case of the mechanics, the energy behind all this. It's that the nervous system, in a sense, it doesn't know this, of course, but it does not want to know the truth. Or, if you want it a little more manifold, life does not want men to understand anything outside their own personal interest, beyond what is local reality right now. But put another way, simply, is the nervous system itself. The human intellect does not want to know the truth, because it would set it free. And a man in town that was suddenly stripped of his homeland, that is not a pretty picture. No, I didn't mean that to be funny. It'd just simply be, it doesn't happen, but it would be absolute destruction. It'd just be insanity. The man would no longer be part of the nexus of ordinary life. And of course, that's why it doesn't happen on any large scale. But notice, again, the diciness of it, that it sounds so great. You should know the truth, or strive to know the truth. You should want to know the truth because it'll set you free. And something stirs in the hearts of intellectual people throughout all cities to go, yes, yes, when it's not true. And of course, that's an additional problem. That, yes, I would want to know the truth because it would set me free. And I won't know the truth. And that's the problem to many people. It's no problem. The intellect is not wired up. It could not stand it. It does not really want to know the truth because it would set it free. It's why it can't find or know the truth.